Hello, everyone out there in the world today. Today is Wednesday, February 19th, 2025, and I am recording to you. Hopefully, I'll get through the first chapter of this book today. I want to tell you a little bit about the book I'm going to read to you, uh, why I find it so interesting, a little bit about the author, Elbridge Brooks. He published in 1891 The Story of the United States of America Told for Young People. And this has been one of the books in my ancestral archive that some of it's here behind me. It's too big to fit all on these shelves, but one of the things I did not know about this particular book and this author was I have something in common with him in that we're both children of ministers. And one of the things I think, as we call ourselves the PKs, the preacher kids, or the MK, the minister kids, um, we're surrounded by books, archives, documents, historical information that to us was normal. Uh, but now, as I look back through my life, I realize how special that really is, and that a lot of people didn't have the same access. We weren't necessarily raised wealthy or with any money because we lived at the behest of the church, who owned the parsonage that we lived in and paid for the electricity. And so there wasn't a lot of money to go around, but looking back, there was a lot of knowledge. So that, as we know, from some of my previous episodes, is knowledge is power. And when we have freedom of expression, we can express our knowledge for others to have an opinion about. So looking back in time, I'm going to just go onto Wikipedia here for a moment, um, and tell you a little bit more about him. But this is the thumbnail for his book cover I took a photograph of. I believe this is from my grandmother's book collection, Mary Ann Pascoe, that we've talked about in previous episodes. She was one of the first women in the ancestors, my family, that kept things, and she was a record keeper for a career and also personally. Mary was born in 1913, so I think this, because the flyleaf, when I look at the original copy, is someone in Philadelphia. It was a used book that was passed down, so I think it came into her hands as a child, uh, since it was published about 20 years before she was born. And she was in Coaldale, so I'm kind of piecing together where this came from because I don't recognize the name on the flyleaf. It's from down at East Huntington Street in Philadelphia, PA. Okay, so let's just flip over to here. Elbridge Streeter Brooks. Here's a picture of him. He was born in Lowell, or I think they say it Lowell up there, Massachusetts, in 1846. There's a lot of author, very educated, sophisticated thought that came out of this area at this time. He didn't live that long, so he looks pretty old here in this picture, but he was dead at 55, and I passed that number, so I know it's kind of shocking what he accomplished in such a short period of time in life compared to how long some of us are living today. He's the son of a Universalist minister, and he was raised in Massachusetts and New York City. He was educated in the public schools of Lynn in New York. He left his junior year for work. He ends up settling in Philadelphia and also living in New York City after going and graduating with an AM degree from Tufts College at the time. So here's his interesting thing. So he Brooks took a job as a clerk with the publishing house of D. Appleton and Company in 1865 and continued working professionally for various publishers and magazines for the remainder of his life. He goes through all those different um, companies that he worked for. He became an editor, and then he starts writing fiction, poetry, and plays for children in 1879. His work, so that's right after Civil War. His work appears in St. Nicholas, Wide Awake, Harper's Young People, Golden Days. I remember having those little golden books as a child, and The Independent. Much of this material was afterwards collected into book form and published by D. Lothrop and others. Brooks ultimately penned nearly 70 book-length works, mostly drawn from history and American history in particular. A number of these, however, were revisions or expansions of earlier works issued under new titles. Some of his patriotic works were issued under the Sons of the American Revolution and Daughters of the American Revolution. Brooks also wrote some material for adult audiences, including one of his earliest books, a biography of his father. Critics, of course, because, everyone in the academic and publishing world has to, if you didn't write, you have to put down everyone else's stuff, were dismissed by some critics as machine made because he was so prolific, but proved enduringly popular, some continuing to be reprinted many years after his death. So here's a list of his books. And the fact that he did all this while he was working full time, it's pretty amazing. And he was dead at 55. So the only one I have that I found thus far is The Story of the United States. I wanted to show you, I don't know if they list this beautiful one here, but I wanted to show you this book of his. This one he pulls from, I'm going to read from you today. 1887, American Indian Red Prehistoric Tribes, Pocahontas, Pontiac, Columbus, and Navajo. I'm not sure where the illustrations came from. The book I have, it doesn't give any credit that I found. It just says fully illustrated. So I don't know if it's his illustrations, if he was also doing that. That would be pretty impressive. It just gives credit as him as the author. But this one I've seen the original on sale on the internet here for $500, and there's a lot of interesting. This is interesting, this picture right here. This is very similar to an N.C. Wyeth, the giant, uh, how it's set in format there. Okay. I come back to see if I get this thing to pop back up again. All right, there's his book. So this is the one I'm going to read to you. This is one of the illustrations from the first chapter. I think if I come back over here, it's going to make me, this is my historical book I'm working on for my great uncle. We talked about pursuing Pete, his World War II heroic adventures. Okay, so I'm going to read Elbridge S. Brooks. He publishes in 1891. Now, let me see, was that posthumously? Let's just check. No, okay, so it was right before, he didn't die to 1902. Okay. So this is one of the books that was published while he was still alive. It's pretty long. It's like 244 pages. There's little illustrations on each page. The Story of the United States of America, Chapter 1, The New World That Was Old. Many hundreds of years ago, there lived in ancient Greece a certain wise man whose name was Pythagoras. As a boy, he had been brought up beside the blue Aegean Sea, which is bordering one side of Greece in the Mediterranean. He learned to observe carefully. He became, meaning Pythagoras, a traveler and a teacher, and from the closest study of all the things around him, the earth, the sky, the sun and stars, the rise and fall of tides. I have to hold this very carefully because it's it's going to fall apart on me. The changes of the seasons and all the everyday happenings of this wonderful world of ours, he announced as his belief, a theory that men called ridiculous, but which today every boy and girl beginning the study of geography accepts without question. Pythagoras said to his pupils, the earth is spherical and inhabited all over. So, okay, this is being written in 1891. Pythagoras tells his pupils, which I think he was like pre 700 BC, so more than 3,000 years ago, he tells his pupils in Greece that the earth is spherical and inhabited all over. So he goes on to say that was fully 2,500 years ago, and yet, after nearly 2,000 years had passed, a certain Italian sailor, whose name was Christopher Columbus, and who believed, as did the old Grecian scholar Pythagoras, he made the same statement before a council of the most learned men of Spain and was laughed to scorn. This Italian is crazy, they said. Why, if the earth is round, the people on the other side would be walking about with their heels above their heads, and all the trees would grow upside down, and the ships must sail uphill. It is absurd. All the world knows that the earth is flat. So there's obviously lots of discussion today about this and what was Christopher Columbus and the people at large aware of. So he was definitely like secret society member, so he would have access to hidden knowledge that not necessarily everyone would have. However, I think the Spanish royalty that paid for his trip would also have access to the same hidden knowledge. Maybe the people of the day, the serfs of the day, maybe didn't know, but I'm sure the royalty did as well. There's someone has an actual globe that he used, like of what they understood at the time. But this Italian soldier, Christopher Columbus, was persistent, and better still, he was patient. His life had been full of adventure. From his boyhood, he had been a sailor and a soldier, a fighter and a traveler in many lands and upon many seas. He loved the study of geography, and he was an expert map drawer. He had noticed much and thought more. Believing in the theory of Pythagoras, familiar to Italian scholars, that this earth was a globe, he also believed that by sailing westward he could at least reach India, or Cathay, as all the East was then called. For in those days, 400 years ago, Eastern Asia was a new land to Western Europe. It was supposed to be the home of wealth and luxury, and from it came the gold and spices and all the rare things that Europe most desired, but which were only to be procured by long and dangerous journeys over land. To the man who would find a seaway to India, great honors and greater riches were sure to come. So all adventurous minds were bent upon discovering a new way to the east. And there's two pictures. There's an engraving of Christopher Columbus that I don't really remember seeing before. He has no hat on. I was kind of worried. And then there's a little illustration of a dream of Cathay, which is like a little hand sketch of looks like a mosque kind of building and a fountain. Christopher Columbus solved the problem. The surest and safest way to the east, he said, is to sail west. This really sounded so ridiculous that, as we have seen, men called him crazy and for a long time would have nothing to do with him or his schemes, but he persisted. And then there's this beautiful, looks like more like a photograph. I'm going to try to figure out how to put the audio maybe to these pictures. The Laurentian rocks of the Adirondack region. So kind of up in the New York area, the Adirondacks. They have a picture there. So Columbus persisted, he gained friends, and he talked so confidently of success and so eloquently of spreading the knowledge of the Christian religion among the heathen folk of Asia, so attractively of getting from these same heathen folk their trade, their gold and their spices, that at last the king and queen of Spain were won over to his side. And on the 3rd of August, 1492, with 3 ships and 120 men, Christopher Columbus set sail from the port of Palos, Palos, in southwestern Spain, and steered straight out into what people called the dreadful Sea of Darkness, in search of a new way to India across the western waters. But though Columbus was right in his theories, and though by traveling westward he could at last reach India and the East, something that he knew nothing of lay in his path to stop his sailing westward. What was it? I just got to say, from my Swedish ancestral heritage and my research and studying of what the Vikings had done, meaning that all the Scandinavian countries, they had gone west down the coast of North America. There's lots of little there runes along the way. So my theory is that they were probably in the Philadelphia area where I grew up um, before Columbus was there. So I think there was a lot of this knowledge. They also came down, the Swedes in particular, came down the eastern rivers of Europe and became the Swedish royal guard for the Byzantine Empire in Constantinople, and today what we call Istanbul in Turkey. So they were like moving all over the globe. So it's not like this was the first voyage, that anyone took to visit the Americas. Upon the western half of the Earth's surface, stretching its 10,000 miles of length, almost from pole to pole, lay a mighty continent, twin countries, each 3,000 miles wide and joined by a narrow strip of land, known now to us as North and South America. This western continent contains 3/10 of all the dry land on the surface of the globe. It is nearly 15 million square miles in extent and is 4 times as large as Europe, 5 times the size of Australia, 1/3 larger than Africa, and not quite as vast as Asia. Excuse me. And this is what stopped the way as Columbus sailed westward to the east. The dust in these older books bother my allergies. Interesting, like this is how much knowledge and description, at this point in time, we kind of tend to look backward and say, oh, they didn't know anything. But I feel, in my view, there's a lot more detail in here than some of my history books that I had as a child in the 70s. Okay, so here's this thing about the Laurentian rocks that I was telling you. I'll see if I can figure out how to upload a picture of this. Trying to do this about. So this is what he's talking about next. The Laurentian rocks of the Adirondack region. But though it was new and an all unknown land, to the great navigator, it is the oldest land in the world. So Christopher Columbus is documenting that it's the oldest land in the world. The region from the Adirondack forests northward to and beyond the St. Lawrence River, and known as the Laurentian Rocks, is said by those students of the rocks, the geologists, to have been the very first land that showed itself above the receding waters that once covered the whole globe. And all along the hills and valleys of North America to the south, as far as the Alleghenies, which is coming down into Appalachia, Pennsylvania, and below that, as far south as the Alleghenies and the Ohio, the great ice sheet that once overspread the earth and that was driven by the advancing heat nearer and nearer to the North Pole, uncovered a land so early in the history of this Western world that it was old when Europe and Asia were new. So this is again 1891 talking about things from what they knew at that point in time and how we kind of dumbed them down. So I find this really fascinating to read like that point in time what they were actually understanding from their own perspective and their own words. So Brooks goes on. This old land, however, is commonly called the New World. And that is because it was new to the Europeans 400 years ago. But long before their day, there had been people living within what is now the United States, away back in what is known to geologists as the Pleistocene period. And that is the most new or deposit age, when the ice was slipping northward and dirt was being deposited on the bare rocks. When the verdure and vegetation that make hillside and valley so beautiful today, and they hyphenate today, TO hyphen day, they were just beginning to tinge the earth with green. And when, I found this interesting, the great hairy elephant bathed in the Hudson River and the woolly rhinoceros wallowed in the prairie lakes, when the dagger-toothed tiger prowled through the forests of Pennsylvania and the giant sloth browsed on the treetops from Maine to Georgia, when the curved tusked mastodon ranged through the Carolinas and monstrous toed birds waded in the Charles, meaning the Charles River. And that's the little picture I have on the thumbnail here. This is the monstrous toed bird wading in the Charles River, and you see the little cavemen. The other interesting thing about this photo, this illustration is, so he has these hunting men, but then there's like cities behind them in this picture. So you see that little outline back there? And until I edited that photo, someone brightened it up. I didn't realize that he had what looks like buildings. Maybe it was supposed to be mountains, but it looks like buildings. When all of these ancient animals were prowling around that we just went through that list, there appeared also by the lakeside, river, and seashore a naked, low-browed, uncouth race of savages chipping the flint stones of the Trenton gravel banks. And I know where Trenton is. That's in New Jersey. It's just above Philadelphia on the Delaware River, dividing Pennsylvania and New Jersey. So he must have really been following geology because I didn't know any about this stuff, that there was gravel banks and that there was documentation at that point in time of them making flint stones way back in the day. So they're making knives, spearheads, and disputing with the great birds and beasts whose trails and tracks they crossed for the very caves and holes in which they lived. These were the first Americans. The more people mix with each other, the more friendly they become. In savage lands today, tribes that are furious fighters against hostile tribes are linked together by some bond of family ties and held by some sort of internal government. So it was with the early Americans. As soon as they had risen above the first brutal desire for eating and sleeping, they learned the difference between fighting for food and fighting for power. They saw that the skins of the animals they killed could be wrapped about them for shelter, and that a sharpened stone was a better weapon than one that was simply flung at their enemy or their game. And they have a picture of an early American floating around like in a little seashell. It's very interesting illustrations in this book. So I'm going to try to figure out how to maybe put them up on a page because this is now in the public domain. He passed away in 1902, so it's been in the domain for at least 30 years now. So I can be able to share that. All right, where did we go here? From fighting with the beasts and with each other, they began to band together for protection. Then those who lived in the more favored portions of the land grew a little more mindful of one another's wants, and they made of themselves little communities in which fishing and hunting were the chief pursuits, but where those who had the time and inclination began to fashion things of stone or clay to meet their needs. Bowls and mortars, knives and arrowheads were followed in time by bracelets and bands, vases and pipe bowls. Still they progressed. The communities became tribes, and some of them began to build houses, to make cloth, and to do something more than simply to eat and fight and sleep. Today, all over the middle portion of the United States, from New York to Missouri, and this I found interesting. We're talking about this a lot today. From New York to Missouri, there are found great heaps of earth, which wise men who have studied them say are the remains of the towns and villages, the forts and temples, the homes and trading places of the most civilized portion of the American people of 2 or 3 thousand years ago, and are known for want of a better name under the term, quote, the mound builders. So in 1891, the mound builders were better known because I think they could still see. They hadn't like turned everything into suburbia, so there was more physical evidence that they were studying. There's still some that exist. There's I think the Four Forgotten Cities might be the name of the book, where the mound builders that are in the St. Louis area. There's now been 20 years of archaeological study of that particular set of mounds. There's a lot of southern Illinois. There was mound builders there, Ohio. Okay, back to his Brooks's description. So the mound builders are known to him in 1891 from New York to Missouri is how he describes the great heaps of earth from the state of New York all the way to Missouri, which is like St. Louis on the Mississippi River, in the far western plains and river courses, in Arizona and New Mexico, and along the banks of the mighty Colorado River, which is the one that runs through the Grand Canyon, there exist remains of great houses covering large sections or perched away up in the crevices of mighty cliffs. These were occupied in the early days by races now called for convenience the Pueblo, or house builders, and the cliff dwellers. All these home-building people were, however, of the same race as the fierce and homeless savages who still hunted and slaughtered in the forests of the East or on the prairies of the West. All were Americans coming from the same, quote, parent stock, some of them being brighter, more ambitious, or more helpful than others, simply made the most of their opportunities and grew even into a rude kind of civilization. But while these advanced, the others stood still. Here in the old American homeland was fought the fight that all the world had known, the conflict between ignorance and intelligence. The good and the bad, the workers and the drones, the wise ones and the wild ones, here struggled for the mastery. A certain attempt at civilization, which some had made, went down in blood and conquest, and so gradually out of the strife came those red men of America that our ancestors, the discoverers and colonists from across the sea, found and fought with 4 centuries ago. So it sounds like he's like describing us. Here in our quote modern enlightened times, we're still do the same thing, fighting with each other. Some of us are wise, some of us are wild, some of us are blood and conquest. So it's the same stuff going on with just different tools and weapons, isn't it? Hunters require vast tracts of land to support them in anything approaching comfort. Wars and tribal hostilities prevent rapid growth, and there were probably never more than 5 or 600,000 of the red men in North America living within the territory now occupied by the United States. So obviously that's a guesstimate. They were of all classes, ranging from the lowest depths of savageness to the higher forms of barbarism. Some were wild and some were wise, some were brutes and some were statesmen. This sounds like us. Nothing's changed. The same stuff. Some were as low in the social scale as the tramps and roughs of today, and some as high as your own fathers and mothers are seen from your standpoint today. The 500,000 red men, or Native Americans as we would call them today, who owned, or tribal nations, who owned and occupied our United States 400 years ago, though scattered over a vast area, speaking different languages and varying according to location in costumes, customs, manners, laws, and life. They were still brothers, springing from the same original family and having in whatever section of the land they lived certain things alike. They all had the same straight black hair. They all used in their talk the same sort of many syllabled words, bunch words, as they were called. It's the first time I've heard that. And they were all what we know as communists, that they had held their land, their homes, and their property in common. There's a picture of a war chief of the mound builders, and it's very interesting because today the mound builders, when they have found evidence that there's like metal in there. So this guy has a sword and a shield, and they have been finding like a lot of copper in those kind of mound arrangements for the funeral pyres. A red American's village was like one large family, all its life, all its interests, and all its desires being shared jointly by all of its inmates. I just want to come back to this many-syllable bunch of words. There's a lot of words in the Philadelphia area that were Indian, and they definitely would name, like the names of the rivers have stuck. So, and there are bunches of words. So Neshaminy Creek, Schuylkill River, uh, are two that come like jumping to my mind. Susquehanna. So just as today, I'm going to come back. The people of Natick or Catskill or Zanesville or Pasadena should agree to live together in one big house with little compartments for each family, eating together from the same soup kettle and dividing all they raised and all they found equally between all the inmates of the one big house. The men did the hunting and fishing and fighting. The women attended to the homework and the field labor. The boys and girls learned early to do their share, and in the home the woman of the house was supreme. Even the greatest war chief, when once within his house, dare not disobey the women of his house. So that was their kingdom. So the men's kingdom was outside, the women's kingdom was inside. The red men had but a dim idea of God in heaven, which of course today we know that's not true. They had a very deep understanding and connection with God and through nature. It says they worshiped the winds, the thunders, and the sun, and were terribly afraid of whatever they could not understand. And I would argue, I think they understood very well why they should be afraid. They had good spirits and bad, those that helped them in seed, time, and harvest, in woodcraft and the chase, and those also that baffled and annoyed them with arrows, when arrows failed to strike, traps to catch, or crops to grow. In other words, the red men of North America were but as little children, this is funny, who have not yet learned and cannot therefore understand the reasons and the cause of the daily happenings that make up life. So that's like the other thing is like how superior we all think we are, right? So I'm going to bring this forward to today. How many of us, how many times do you think you know everything? And you're going to tell everyone else how they're wrong and how you're much more intellectually superior than anyone else. So just now, fast forward to now, we're dead, and it's 2091, 2491, and they're looking back on us with our little computers and locked in on our cell phones and how we're like calling other people um, rudimentary and rough and stupid. So think about what you say every day. Your words will betray you in how superior you think you are compared to other people. So I remind myself of that every day. That and this is what the great thing about looking back into history is. You start to read how the human condition is we all think we have it figured out, and clearly none of us do. So this is why we rely on some spiritual guidance, and humility is what keeps us from our pride, because pride comes before the fall. And that's it for today. I'll read chapter 2 in a future episode, but I want to get this one on record. Namaste.